Belief in miracles is pervasive. A 2016 Harris poll revealed 72% of Americans believe in the reality of miracles. But how can one distinguish in practice between a miracle and mere coincidence? Are believers justified in seeing a higher power behind extraordinary moments? Or instead, can we look through the rational lens of probability and statistics to illuminate these events as common and explainable occurrences situated within the natural realm? Joseph Andrew is a Democratic politician and a lawyer. He was the former national chairman of the Democratic National Committee from 1999 to 2001. On September 11, 2001, Andrew was scheduled to travel on American Airlines Flight 77, a domestic passenger flight from Washington Dulles International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport. Due to last-minute changes in his travel plans, Andrew did not end up boarding Flight 77. History is written from this point on, as Flight 77 would go on to be hijacked and deliberately crashed into the Pentagon as part of a concentrated September 11th terrorist attack. Andrew narrowly missed certain death due to a last-minute change of circumstance. Should one believe that Andrew's story constitutes a miraculous occurrence? Well, he does. And note that by miracle I merely mean an event attributed to divine intervention or defying natural explanation. After the events that transpired, Andrew claimed, "I happen to be a person of faith, but even if you aren't, anybody who holds a ticket for a flight that went down will become a person of faith." Even if one disagrees with Andrew's specific outlook on God's role in what transpired on September 11th, it's no secret that many people fall victim to the same line of reasoning in their own lives. Spontaneous recoveries from illness or uncanny alignments of circumstances are ubiquitously imbued with divine or metaphysical significance. But are inferences of divine providence justified? After all, how can one definitively know when a rare occurrence has the hand of God behind it, or when one is justified in raising a natural occurrence to the level of the miraculous? To put it another way, how can one unambiguously tell the difference between the miraculous and mere chance? This seems difficult for those who believe in miracles to answer, as both events, miracles and coincidences, are by their very nature rare and improbable. There's clearly no objective probabilistic threshold that an occurrence must cross in order to be dubbed a miracle. The battle seems to be fought at the level of subjective human perspective. A random chance occurrence like that of Joseph Andrew might, from the outside, seem like what it is, serendipity. But to Andrew himself, who was one seemingly minuscule sudden choice away from death, it seems much more meaningful and significant. Or take the case of someone diagnosed with terminal cancer. Their prognosis is incredibly bleak, yet they take chemotherapy and are prayed for by a multitude of family and friends. Spontaneously, the cancer enters remission. What are we to make of that? Is it just mere happenstance that an advanced and terminal stage of cancer would vanish so quickly, all the while pleas to the divine are being made? Well, from the perspective of modern medicine, yes. This happens frequently enough, believe it or not. But from the perspective of the individual and their family who are emotionally and spiritually invested, this occurrence likely marks the fingerprints of God. Is there a way, though, that we can forego wading through the waters of subjectivity and instead arrive at more definitive answers of what's actually behind remarkable and extraordinary occurrences? In the book The Improbability Principle, Why Coincidences, Miracles, and Rare Events Happen Every Day, author and mathematician David Hand puts forward what he calls the law of inevitability, which explains exactly why, just as the title of the book articulates, what we take to be coincidences and miracles are actually very common and easily explainable occurrences. Before this law is elucidated, let's take a quick detour into probability. When attempting to calculate the probability of an event, one crucial step is to outline what's known as the sample space. The sample space of an event is just a list of all possible outcomes of that event itself. So, for example, in the simple event of flipping a coin, the sample space would be heads and tails, because the coin can possibly land as heads or tails. If the event was flipping a coin twice, the sample space would be heads heads, heads tails, tails heads, and tails tails. In simple events like these, the sample space is relatively small, as the number of possible outcomes themselves are quite limited. But what about events with more elements or variables? Take a standard deck of 52 cards. If the event is pulling one card randomly from the deck, the sample space would obviously be the list of all 52 cards in that deck, because all 52 cards can possibly be chosen. But even that event is quite simple. What about randomly drawing 5 cards from the deck, like in a game of poker? In that case, just one element in the sample space could look like this: the Queen of Hearts, 2 of Spades, 8 of Clubs, Ace of Diamonds, and 10 of Spades. The corresponding element in the sample space could be written as such. But obviously, that's just one hand that one could receive. But instead of the 10 of Spades they received, they could have received the Jack of Hearts. Or instead of the Ace of Diamonds, they could have received the 5 of Spades. Clearly, there's a multitude of possibilities here. But how many possibilities exactly? Well, if one were to list the sample space of all possible outcomes of this event, there would be 2,598,960 possible outcomes. That's quite a large sample space. Now, here's where the law of inevitability comes into play. The law of inevitability simply articulates that something must occur. Yes, that's it. Something must occur. But why is that profound enough to be dubbed a law of probability? Well, for the reason that, given these over 2.5 million outcomes, if you draw a hand of 5 cards, one of these outcomes must obtain. And yet each outcome in and of itself is incredibly and equally unlikely. For instance, in poker, the most coveted hand is a royal flush, which consists of an ace, king, queen, jack, and 10 of the same suit. Given the rules of poker, this specific hand seems more valuable and less probable than other hands. But, according to the sample space, all hands are just as unlikely. The probability of being dealt this specific royal flush is the exact same as being dealt any random 5 cards from the deck. So, if the probability of being dealt this specific royal flush is 1 in 2,598,960, this equates to a probability of 0.00038%, an astronomically low probability. But, to reiterate, being dealt any specific 5-card hand carries the exact same improbability. And this is again where the law of inevitability is relevant. Given such a large sample space, remember the sample space contains over 2.5 million outcomes, every single possibility is astronomically unlikely. So when the law of inevitability states very modestly that something must occur, in large enough sample spaces, this entails the profound truth that something incredibly unlikely and improbable must occur. Stated somewhat differently, the law of inevitability entails that the improbable is actually extremely probable. Now think about how this applies to the real world. The real world contains exponentially more elements and variables than a deck of cards, and these variables engage in exponentially more diverse iterations and permutations than simply being dealt 5 hands in a game of poker. Think of the different ways that people, places, things, and circumstances can possibly interact and combine to produce unique and peculiar outcomes. Given all of this, occurrences that might seem to us to be so highly improbable to be mere happenstance must actually be quite common. And thus, events that might seem so unlikely, such that they constitute the miraculous, will likely turn out to be more ordinary and prevalent than they appear. Think back to the case of Joseph Andrew. Is it really all that unlikely that a case such as his occurred? People miss flights every day for a variety of reasons, and unfortunately, terrorist attacks are not all that uncommon either, as depressing a picture as this paints of our modern world. According to the Global Terrorism Index, there were over 3,000 terrorist attacks in 2023 alone. That's more than 8 a day. Given these considerations, it's actually very likely that stories like Joseph Andrews exist. In fact, it's pretty much inevitable that they will. That's what the law of inevitability demonstrates. Or consider, again, the case of someone spontaneously recovering from terminal cancer. Despite a prognosis of terminal cancer, treatment is many times still proffered to patients in this circumstance, with remission rates of terminal cancer varying anywhere from approximately 1% to 10% depending on the cancer type. Those odds are actually vastly higher than the probability of being dealt a royal flush in poker that we surveyed earlier. And given that most individuals suffering a life-threatening disease are likely prayed for by those close to them, it's not at all unlikely to see a plethora of cases just like this. The probabilities are not nearly as low as we think they are, and even when they are, we've seen from the law of inevitability that even the most improbable outcomes will still occur. The problem seems to come down not to the probabilities of the occurrences themselves, but rather the significance we subjectively imbue these occurrences with. To return to the royal flush, remember that this specific hand is no more improbable than any other, and it holds no intrinsic significance over any other possible hand. It's just that we have subjectively assigned this hand and no other as the most valuable hand in all of poker. Similarly, Joseph Andrew values his experience quite significantly because of how much he subjectively values his life, and not necessarily because of any reason involving objective probabilities. And a patient who beats the odds and spontaneously survives a terminal cancer diagnosis, all the while being prayed for, also views this occurrence through a subjective lens of value and faith, despite the fact that the probability of this event is not all that unlikely. So, the overarching point here is that belief in miracles, while deeply meaningful to many, often stems from a subjective interpretation of rare but statistically inevitable events. What may appear miraculous is frequently explicable through the lens of probability and the law of inevitability. This principle reveals that, in a world of vast possibilities, highly improbable events are not only possible, but expected. The distinction between a miracle and a coincidence thus hinges not on objective criteria, but on the personal significance we assign to these occurrences. While faith may imbue such moments with divine meaning, probability theory suggests they are often natural outcomes within a complex and unpredictable world. This perspective does not negate the metaphysical possibility of miracles, but instead challenges us to critically examine the interplay between human perception, statistical reality, and the mysteries that continue to inspire wonder. Thanks for watching.